Houston Texans up first. Now, Teddy, this is kind of a team last couple of years, we'll say, maybe took some people by surprise, right? We're starting to see some movement within them and how we kind of want to see this team going forward. But currently, season wins 9.5. That over is even money, under -120. 115 to win the AFC South, 17-1 to win the AFC, and 35-1 to win the Super Bowl. Let's break down this Texans team and kind of get into the nitty-gritty of what you think we're going to see here with CJ Stroud in his third year.
Sure. And with all of these team previews, I start with last year, the starting point from last year. And then we talk about what happened in the offseason. We talk about the schedule as well. So lots of different factors to consider for any squad. And, of course, this is a Texans team. You mentioned it. They were bottom feeders. You know, they went 4-13 in 2021. They went 3-13-1 in 2022, cashed under bets in each of those years. Although I think one of them was a push. They were lined at 4 wins in 2021. Then as a 6.5 win team in 2023, they finished 10-7, flew over the win total. Last year, they snuck over their win total. 9.5 wins was where they were lined. 10 is what they cashed. DeMeco Ryans now in his third year as the head coach. New offensive coordinator, Nick Caley. He can only be an upgrade over the departed Bobby Slowick. New offensive line coach Cole Popovich. And both Caley and Pop worked for Belichick in New England. So we're expecting, at least from a design standpoint, Houston's offense and Houston's offensive line perhaps to be a little bit better than it was a year ago. Last year, they finished +10 in turnovers. That was the 7th best in the NFL. Buffalo, Pittsburgh, Green Bay, the Chargers, the Vikings, and the Eagles were all better. They were below average in terms of yards per play on offense, only 5.2 yards per play gained, but they had the number 4 defense in terms of yards per play allowed, 5.1 yards per play. So the defense was a big factor in their relative success last year. And they had a middle-of-the-pack schedule last year based on my power ratings the week the game was played. They weren't a particularly healthy team last year. 75 players suited up, bottom 10 in injury luck. And, you know, so they went into the offseason going, yeah, we're close, but last year, something of a different point in terms of being after the breakthrough season in 23. 24 was not a breakthrough campaign. And of course, now they're 0-6 all-time in the divisional round, another early exit from the postseason. So when it came to the offseason, everyone pointed towards the offensive line for Houston and as an area of notable weakness. Well, from a pundit standpoint, everyone's looking at this offensive line going, it looks worse, not better. They traded away Laramie Tunsil. They brought in some veteran additions who weren't necessarily very good last year, Laken Tomlinson, Ed Ingram, Cam Robinson, Trent Brown, older guys. You know, they drafted a tackle in the 2nd round. That being said, there were many people who expected this team to really focus on offensive line in the offseason. And it looked like the moves that they made weren't necessarily moves that impressed pundits. So the coaching is different. The personnel is going to be different. But what's the biggest question for Houston? It's the offensive line right now. Even with Titus Howard, you know, if he's going to move to left tackle, they're hoping that there's going to be competition on that line this season. They've also got issues in terms of the receiving core. You know, Steph Diggs is gone. Tank Dell's likely to miss the season or most of the season with a knee injury. That being said, still got Nico Collins. They brought in Christian Kirk from Jacksonville in a trade this past offseason. And they got a couple of rookies that they're counting on out of Iowa State, both out of Iowa State, who have the potential to bring this into a well-rounded unit. And in theory, it might be good. And defensively, look, this is a dominant defense. And formidable edge tandem and Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter. Sheldon Rankin stuff the run in the middle. You know, they have the best cornerback combo in the NFL. Derek Stingley got a $90 million extension. C.J. Gardner-Johnson came over from Philly in a trade. And his quote is worth noting. Gardner-Johnson's quote, championship or nothing. Didn't bring me here to win the division or the conference. So there's certainly high expectations for Houston in Houston, even though the rest of the betting markets, not so much in that regard. We look at their schedule. And of course, when we talk about schedule, there's 4 components. Talk about last year's strength of schedule. How deserved was their record? This year's strength of schedule based on this year's win totals. And the composition of the schedule. Easy opponents early versus easy opponents late is a huge difference in how the season plays out. And of course, we talk about rest differentials when it is a factor. In this situation, there's not a lot of these that are come in play for Houston. The AFC South faces the AFC West, and the NFC West is their 2 division. Their 3 extra games, Tampa Bay, Baltimore, Buffalo. That's an ouch when it comes to 3 tough opponents, especially compared to what the rest of the division has. And frankly, those 3 opponents probably keep me off the Texans over. I like the composition of this squad. I think the markets are kind of undervaluing Houston based on the offensive line concerns. That being said, for all the concerns about the offensive line, it's a team that had a clear plan for what they wanted to do. Maybe it works out a little better than the pundits might like to think.
You mentioned Wednesday, your report for the entire NFL season is going to come out. Tell everybody, if they buy that report, what they're going to receive.
So you're going to get, there's a part 1 that comes out on Wednesday. When applicable, I add more plays in the preseason after week 2 or week 3, depending. There are years that I've added plays. There are years I haven't. It just depends on what the markets do. So I don't want to promise I'm going to add plays, but there is, in theory, a part 2 to the report based on what we see over the first the games in August. The report traditionally 4, 5, 6 in that range. I've been whittling down the short list for the last month, and it's kind of crunch times and which ones I'm going to use and which ones I'm going to bet and all of that. But in addition to the plays, the write-ups are every bit as important because you're going to find out all these little details and nuances. I spent a lot of time writing them up and talking about the teams and the thought process behind it. And people use those write-ups all year long. And that's another advantage of the season win report. When I'm right, we're betting on these teams, they're betting against these teams that we have in the win report consistently. And when I'm wrong, we notice it early and we start flipping and go the other way on some of these squads. And that tends to work. I know that there was one year that I was like 6 wins off on them, but we made a boatload betting on them all year because I was so wrong and I saw it early. So that can and does happen. So that's what you get with the win report. Again, it's $199 to buy straight. If you want to buy the win report itself, it's free if you get on board with the NFL season package. And obviously, today we have that promo code NFL100. Take $100 off that season package, and you'll get this win report at noon Pacific time on Wednesday, all included. Nothing more to buy, no nonsense in that regard.
7.5 is their season win total, -110 on both sides, plus 380 to win the division, 50-1 to win the AFC. Wow. Plus 12,000 to win the Super Bowl. Let's talk about the Indianapolis Colts, Teddy.
Sure. Last year, lined at 8.5 wins. They finished 8-9. The year before, they were lined at 6.5 wins. They finished 9-8. So 17-17 for Shane Steichen, now in his 3rd year as the head coach. We have a situation where the owner, Jim Irsay, died this past offseason. Now his 3 daughters take over. What does that mean? It means the coach is on a little bit more of a hot seat, perhaps. The GM, Chris Ballard, I would say, on the hot seat. There's urgency for the Colts this year. A year ago, 5.5 yards per play gained on offense, middle of the pack. 5.5 yards per play allowed on defense, middle of the pack, slightly below average. They were number 24 in scoring defense and number 29 in total defense and number 25 in sacks. So despite having DeForest Buckner on the squad, who's unblockable at times. So the defense, even though the yards per play defense was okay, some of the other metrics were not quite so good for that defense. Last year finished -4 in turnovers, nothing big there. But here's the interesting factor. They went 8-9 last year, under their season win total. And that came, again, I use my powering numbers on the game the week was played for my strength of schedule numbers. My strength of schedule says that Indy played the 3rd weakest schedule in the NFL last year. Only Miami and Washington had it easier. So the fact that they played such an easy schedule and still finished below 500, they were also healthy last year. They only used 66 players, number 4 in health in that regard. So they were healthy last year, and they had an easy schedule, and they were still a sub 500 squad. From a coaching standpoint, Jim Bob Cooter back for his third year as offensive coordinator. The new DC, Lou Anarumo, he got run out of town after a disaster defense in Cincinnati last year. That being said, Gus Bradley got run out of town in Indy. So Anarumo was the guy they settled on as DC. You know, he has experience. So I'll give him that much. We talk about the offseason moves. You know, they lost some key pieces on the offensive and defensive line. They bring in Daniel Jones to battle Anthony Richardson. You know, there's talk Jones could start week 1. And Richardson is obviously the guy with the upside. These are 2 former first rounders. Richardson's a guy who Indy's kind of vested in. Now in his third year, 50.6% completions, 11 touchdowns, 13 interceptions. These are his career numbers. It's now or never time for this guy. And the offense is supposed to revolve around Jonathan Taylor if things break right. You know, they did lose 2 starters in the offensive line. A third's coming back from season-ending injuries. In my mind, this team has a lot of offensive line question marks. The receiving core looks pretty good. You know, I worry about their depth, but Pittman, Downs, Pierce, that's a nice 1-2-3 at wide receiver. And depth, teams find depth when they have receiving core injuries. You don't tend to see teams lose all their playmakers, even when guys get hurt. Houston last year may be an exception. They spent a bunch of free agent dollars to the secondary on defense. You know, most notably Cameron Bynum, the safety, and Javarius Ward as well. And of course, they drafted tight end Tyler Warren with the first-round pick, and then a couple of defenders in the second and third round, edge rusher and a cornerback, Justin Wally, out of Minnesota. So in terms of need, there was certainly need on defense, and the tight end position has been a hole. As a young QB, whether it's Jones or Richardson, Jones is still a young QB. He's never been a successful starter. A good tight end is important to have. When we look at the schedule for this year, there's, you know, again, AFC South versus AFC West and NFC West teams. There are 3 extra games, Miami, Pittsburgh, and they play Atlanta in Berlin. It's not a brutal schedule by any stretch of the imagination. And, you know, my first lean was under towards Indy. At 7.5, I'm not sure I'm going to get there. The number is just a little bit low for the Colts. There's upside for this team if things break right. There's downside if things don't. In my mind, the Colts, one of these squads that if we're paying attention and see which way the arrow is pointing, might be able to make money with them once the season starts. Going in terms of preseason expectations, they look mediocre. They're probably going to be mediocre, and they might be bad, and they might be good. So when you have those scenario, you tend to tap the brakes. There's certainly urgency there, and there's certainly talent there, but execution-wise, I do still have my concerns about this organization.
Jacksonville Jaguars. Let's get into this team. Boy, oh boy, have they been on kind of, well, I'll call it a roller coaster ride. I mentioned them also having the same season win total as the Colts, 7.5, but their division odds are significantly better, plus 260. AFC odds plus 35 to 1, excuse me, and then 80 to 1 to win the Super Bowl. I don't know what to make of this team. I was betting against them a couple of years ago when I thought Houston was significantly better. Now, Trevor Lawrence in his 5th year. What are we going to see from this team that has had a coaching carousel as of late?
Sure. Before I talk about the Jags, I do want to mention, as you talked about that NFL promo code, look, you can buy the NFL win report. It's 103-52 lifetime, 17-4 with the 5% big tickets. And I went back and looked, by the way. I have had 3 losing seasons, 2005, 2010, 2019, and a couple years where I lost juice. 2017, I went 3-3, but I lost the 5%. I lost some juice in 2022. Not every year has been perfect, but 103-52 over a 24-year sample size, 17-4 with the 5% big tickets. We won last year. We won the big tickets last year. It's been a consistently profitable report, even though it hasn't been dominant every year. And we encourage you to get on board with the report. It's $199 if you want to just get the report. It comes out on Wednesday. But the promo code, NFL100 at checkout, you get the report for free if you want an NFL season pass. I expect to win in the NFL this year. I expect to win big in the NFL this year. And if you want to get on board, take $100 off the season package. You'll get the win report for free, and you'll get every play, every day, all 5% included from day one of the preseason right through the Super Bowl. Again, promo code NFL100 at checkout. I encourage you, take advantage of that offer today. we talk about the Jacksonville Jaguars, and it's a team that with Trevor Lawrence, the expectations have been fairly high. And yet, what have they got? 3-14, 9-8, 9-8, 4-13 over the last 4 seasons. Not exactly lighting it up. Lots of change this offseason. New GM, James Gladstone. First year, first time GM. He worked for the Rams as scouting director. He's the youngest GM in the league. New head coach, Liam Cohen. First year, first time head coach. New offensive coordinator, Grant Udinsky. First year, first time offensive coordinator. He's a 29-year-old former Vikings assistant. Now he's an offensive coordinator under the age of 30 in Jacksonville. New defensive coordinator, Anthony Campanile. He was worked under Jeff Hafley in Green Bay last year. First year, first time DC. So a lot of times you get a rookie head coach, he's going to bring in a veteran as a veteran coach or a veteran coordinator. That's not the way the Jags went. First year, first time GM, head coach, OC, DC. So that could be a concern. 15 turnovers, minus 15 in turnovers last year. Bottom 4, only Cleveland, Tennessee, and the Raiders were worse. 5.2 yards per play on offense, below average. But the real problem for this team last year was defensively. 5.9 yards per play allowed on defense. That's ranked 31 out of 32 NFL teams. Only Carolina was worse. Strength of schedule a year ago, near league average. So it wasn't like they were getting beat up at 4-13 by a tough schedule. It was a mediocre schedule. Now, they were 2-9 in one-score games. No team lost more one-score games. No team played more one-score games than the 11 that the Jags played, and they kept on losing them. Middle of the pack injury-wise last year, nothing to stand out in that regard. So when it comes to offseason moves, it's another new offense for Trevor Lawrence. They do have 4 new offensive linemen from free agency and 1 in the draft. Walker Little, the left tackle, was excellent last year. The rest of the line was not so much. So it's a revamped offensive line. Young wide receiving core. You have Travis Hunter, the number 2 overall pick. Second-year pro, Brian Thomas. The free agent addition, Diami Brown from Washington. He's only 25. Depth could be a big concern on this receiving core, and it's still very young. And it's hard to love this defense. I mean, they signed help at a bunch of different places, but they didn't get anybody good necessarily. You know, they bring in Macari on the offensive line, Jordan Lewis at cornerback, Eric Murray at safety. A lot of deals for second-tier players at reasonable prices in that regard. Schedule-wise, AFC South faces AFC West teams and NFC West teams. The 3 extra games for Jacksonville: Carolina, Cincinnati, and the Jets. Compare that with what Houston's got. It's not a murderer's row. And one thing, Trevor Lawrence, the league's been kind of promoting him a fair bit. The Jags have gotten their fair share of national TV games. Well, the league doesn't seem to care if they're bad this year. They have 1 early season game on Monday Night Football against Kansas City, and that's it for TV games and for night games. When we look at the schedule, we talk about what happens early versus what happens late. The Jacksonville Jaguars schedule down the stretch: Tennessee, Indy, Jets, Denver, Indy, Tennessee, last 6 games. They get hot. They got a chance to make a run down the stretch, but that's an if. So there's hope for the Jags, but this is a team that is coming in season with a lot of holes and a lot of question marks, despite the new regime and the, in theory, top-tier quarterback.
Teddy, do Tennessee Titans fans have anything to look forward to? I was just kind of looking at my notes from last season, and I knew they were abysmal, 3-14. But the worst part was they were 2-15 against the spread. Week 1, they burned me against the Chicago Bears and never looked back. This is a really, let's just get into it. 5.5 over -150 is their season win total, plus 650 to win the division, 80 to 1 to win the AFC, and 200 to 1 to win the Super Bowl. What is some positive news that Titans fans can look forward to here with Will Levis in his 3rd year?
So I'll talk about some positive news in theory when it comes to the offensive line, at least. But I'm not bullish on Tennessee. Look, this team went 3-14 last year. They were lined as a 6.5 win team. They went 6-11 the year before, lined as a 7.5 win team. They went 7-10 the year before as a 9.5 win team. So 3 consecutive unders for the Titans over the last 3 years when it comes to their season win total. Brian Callahan, second-year head coach. He calls his own plays. Denard Wilson, the defense coordinator, also back for his second year. And one of the big things about bringing in Brian Callahan was that you bring in his dad, the legendary offensive line coach, Bill Callahan. Well, the offensive line was a disaster last year. With Bill Callahan coaching them, we'll talk about it in a moment. Worth noting, new director of football operations, hired a new GM in the offseason, Mike Borgonzi. And when the head coach, Callahan, he's not Borgonzi's guy. So there's urgency for Tennessee in theory. We'll see if how the relationship meshes out between these two players, these two administrators / coaches. But it's always a concern. The coach got hired before the GM, the year before the GM. Sometimes the GM doesn't necessarily take well to the coach. A year ago, 5.0 yards per play on offense. Only 5 teams were worse. Chicago, Cleveland, the Giants, New England, and the Raiders. Worse offensively than Tennessee when it comes to yards per play. They did have a top 10 yards per play defense. Only 5.2 yards per play allowed. So that's certainly a positive sign from a year ago, despite their dismal record. And that's why they were so bad against the spread last year, because the wise guys kept on looking at their defense and going, oh, their defense is good. They'll cover. Well, they also finished minus 16 in turnovers a year ago. Only Cleveland was worse. Strength of schedule in 2024 was right at league average, middle of the pack. They went 2-5 in one-score games, a losing record typical of bottom feeders, and 77 players suited up for Tennessee. That's bottom 10 in terms of health and continuity. When it comes to the off-season move, well, first of all, Tennessee's not a destination that players were dying to go to. So it felt like they overpaid for some of the guys that they were looking for. The offensive line was a huge problem a year ago. Now you've got 3 veterans. Lloyd Cushenberry expected back by opening day. Dan Moore, the big free agent guy. And then a couple of former first rounders. Pete Skoronski, they drafted in the first round in 2023. J.C. Latham, they drafted the first round in 2024. With a legendary OL coach and what looks like some talent on the offensive line, if guys are healthy and if the first rounders live up to expectation, there's a chance that Cam Ward, and I haven't mentioned it yet, that Cam Ward is going to have a decent offensive line to throw behind. When it comes to the skill position talent, look, Calvin Ridley, they signed an aging Tyler Lockett. It's not a strong receiving unit. There's zero quality depth. And the skill position talent here is limited. When I'm a rebuilding squad, that's what I want. First, fix your trenches. Second, fix your secondary. Third, fix your quarterback. Fourth, find some skill position talent. And they've at least, it looks like they're doing it in the right order in that regard. Quarterback, offensive line, defense, all ahead of skill position talent. That said, their skill position talent is weak. No pass rush was a real problem last year. It looks like a problem again in 25. This entire defense, it's not like they made big moves on fixing the defense. It's just hole patching this offseason. Special teams were bottom tier last year. New coordinator this year, but nothing we can count on. This team is not primed to win in 2025. They are one of the weakest teams in the NFL, even with some of the signings. Again, Dan Moore and Kevin Zeitler and Cody Barton and Xavier Woods and the handful of free agents. From a draft standpoint, look, the last 3 quarterbacks drafted by Tennessee, they had Marcus Mariota, fail. Jake Locker, fail. Vince Young, fail. Steve McNair is the last first-round quarterback this team got right. So Cam Ward, a 0-star prospect out of Incarnate Word, ends up in Washington State, ends up in Miami. Now he's the number 1 overall pick. We'll see how Ward, there's hope for Ward, but you're talking about a rookie QB with limited skill and talent around him. I'm not expecting miracles in that regard. They have a bunch of draft choices. They got some nice depth in the later rounds, but this is a roster with a lot of holes to fill. Previous GM Maurice Carthon left this roster pretty bare. From a schedule standpoint, AFC South teams face the AFC West and the NFC West. There are 3 extra games: New England, Cleveland, New Orleans. As easy as it gets. And that said, they get the Browns and the Saints both late season, and you'd rather have your weak teams early when you're a bad team, give you a little confidence early on, perhaps. You don't know what Cleveland or New Orleans will look like come December. They have a 3-game road trip that starts in week 4. That's bad news for a rookie quarterback. And of course, from a league standpoint, Tennessee is basically invisible this year. No Monday night football, no Sunday night football, no Thursday night football. If you're watching national TV games only, you're not going to see the Titans in 2025.
Well, that's good. The NFL took notes. We got tired of seeing the Titans on Thursday night football.